All right, welcome everybody. So our next session is all about retrofitting and renewing single-family homes. Alia Abaya is the Chief Executive Officer of the Circle Community LandTrust in Toronto, Ontario. And Brandon Riddell is the principal of People Design Coop, a nonprofit architecture practice focused on supporting the transfer of housing into the public domain. Welcome, Brandon and Alia. And I just want to let you know, I'll be giving you a reminder at the end, but lunch will be after this. And as Nat said earlier, we're going to let the folks who are going into the AGM, so the folks who are members of CNCLT, grab lunch first, just to make sure they have time to grab what they need, not have to fight an elbow in the line, and get into the meeting on time. All right, I'll pass it over to you.
Do I need the mic? Is it okay if I don't use it?
I think you need it for the recording.
Oh, okay, fine. Hello, is it on? All right, good morning. So there are a couple of duplicate slides from the previous presentation if you were in the other room, but I promise most of it is new. As Celia said, I'm Alia, I'm the CEO for Circle, and I'm here to talk about our ambitious 72 million capital repair plan and what it means to reimagine stewardship when you're a land trust and you can hold your assets in perpetuity. You can think a lot more grand and long-term. So we'll do a little intro. Our agenda, which is backgrounds, intentions, the broad landscape issues that are affecting our sector and us as a land trust, and what we're doing to address them. And this will all be from our perspective as Circle, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of crossover. And then some questions and problems and what we're doing, and then takeaways. Okay, so this is my favorite, Circle's origin story. So Circle's portfolios is scattered houses. It's single-family homes that are in, residential side streets all around Toronto, mostly in the East End, if you're familiar with Toronto. Starts in like Cabbagetown, which is like a heritage district, so we have houses that are deemed heritage, and then it goes all the way east to Scarborough, Malvern, and so we have every single typology of house, row houses, Edwardians, Victorians, suburban houses built in the 60s, 70s, etc. And that portfolio came originally from Toronto Community Housing, which over the years, they're known for having towers, but they had also acquired all these single-family homes. And as you can imagine, property managing hundreds, they had over 900 at one point, single-family homes is a huge undertaking. And so the houses were falling into a state of disrepair faster than they could be repaired. And at the same time, this is like a decade and more ago, real estate prices in Toronto were starting to skyrocket. And so eventually, City Council appointed a board at TCH, Toronto Community Housing, that decided to sell off all the houses. And basically what happened is the tenants heard about this, and and they took action, which was amazing. They deputized, they reached out to their local councillors. That first slide there are two tenants. They had a whole campaign called We Are Not For Sale. They worked with one of our founding board members, Joy Connolly, who was a longtime housing advocate, to help them get traction. And long story short, they were able to convince the city to protect the houses. City Council's plan was, okay, we'll sell 158 and protect the rest. So then it was what do we do with them though? Because we'll protect them, but we still don't want to property manage them as Toronto Community Housing. And so the idea was then to transfer them to a nonprofit or co-op or land trust. But at the time, there was nobody large enough who could take 800, 700 houses. There were organizations that could maybe take 10 or 20, and then there weren't enough that could take all of them, so that meant some were going to be left behind and in worse off condition. And so the concept of creating a scattered home expert land trust was put forward to this group called Tenants for Social Housing. That was the tenants that initially organized. And one of our founding board members, Joy Connolly, she was the one who helped bring up this idea and asked, what if we built this organization that's what they did? They were just experts in scattered housing and property managing and doing everything internally. What do you think about that plan? And the tenants agreed that they felt that would give them the most opportunity for change and the improvement that they wanted to see. And so that was the concept and the beginnings, the origins of Circle. So the city put out an RFP, and at the time, Circle wasn't we just didn't exist. The city put out this RFP, and so what happened was the first board of Circle formed. And actually one of our founding board members, Tom Clement, is here. And then, yeah, and this board, because like there wasn't an existing organization that we could point to and say, we're just gonna do everything the way we've been doing it. Like, you know, with these buildings, we didn't have that. The board had to like basically draft every single detail possible, like policies, staffing model, pro forma, how we were gonna do RGI, how we were gonna like communicate with tenants, like every single detail had to be planned out, and that was part of our offer. And it was a lot of work, but obviously it also was really helpful because it means we mapped out the entire exercise of who we were gonna be, from like interacting with tenants, our philosophy, our operations, all of it. And because the board that they pulled together were all like the biggest heavy hitters or names in housing at the time, it gave the city the confidence to award a non-existent organization, basically, 600 homes. Yeah. Okay, so the next slide. And that just gives you, some people saw this in the last one, some context about how scattered it is. And from the westernmost point to the easternmost point, you have to drive 45 kilometers on the highway. So yeah, it's not easy. There's a lot of mileage. Okay, thanks. Okay, so who is Circle? I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I started in the arts. Actually, I'm an Emily Carr dropout. And then I moved into the nonprofit sector, philanthropy, and then actually did 4 years in finance. And that was really interesting because usually in finance, you're tied to a product, but my experience is I was tied to a market segment, which was the nonprofit sector and especially affordable housing. And which was really cool because affordable housing providers need everything. Like they need day-to-day banking, they need commercial lending, they need acquisition lending, they need construction financing, all of it, you know, social impact investing. So I got to really like explore and touch a lot of that. And one of the biggest members or clients I had at the time was the Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto, and Tom Clement, who's founding board member of Circle's executive director of that organization, so we worked really closely together. And so when I was at Alterna, the bank, he had an idea. He's like, oh, we're looking for board members for this organization called Circle. And I was like, oh, well, at first I wasn't really looking for a new volunteer opportunity, but anything like Tom puts his name to, it's an automatic check. And I was familiar with the scattered portfolio, and so I was intrigued, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll try it. And then, so I joined the board, and the point where I joined is when they're like trying to find their first CEO. And I wasn't on the hiring committee, so there's a hiring committee of a couple board members and an executive search firm. And so I'm attending board meetings, and I'm hearing them come back to the meetings, so they're reporting to the rest of the board. They're like, okay, we have a short list of some CEOs. We don't love them, but they could definitely do the job. So it's like, okay, there's like, yeah, we're working there, but there's nobody else. And so this is happening. We're like, okay, but I'm not on that committee, so whatever. And then what else was happening is, at that time in my life, I had like a number of contemporaries and colleagues who were actually getting tapped and like rising up and becoming CEOs themselves, which was really exciting. But between these two groups, it was really apparent to me that there was a lack of representation. And so I was sitting at this table, literally sitting at the table at the board while we're like struggling to find a CEO, and sorry, I need water. And thinking, oh wow, I'm at the table where they're actually telling us it's a hard time to find a CEO, and like this is where we should maybe say something about working a little bit harder to like build diversity and like add more representation about who our population is at the clients, our tenants at Circle. And so I said, I think we should do a better job since we don't love these shortlist candidates anyway. Let's try and find maybe a BIPOC CEO as our inaugural CEO. And because we had an amazing board, they totally agreed. It was a good opportunity. They're also the best, and I also mentioned, if you're only looking at existing CEOs, obviously your pool is gonna be limited. So like we should think more broadly, and who better of a board to like mentor or help with a new CEO than this board, because like I mentioned, they're like hugely experienced in housing. And yeah, because they're amazing, they totally agreed. And then I gave them a short list of like 5 people that I thought would be amazing at the job and that they should consider. And I didn't really think about it from then. But then by then I was like so like engaged in this, and I was like really liking the work. I liked it more than my banking work, which I also loved. That I was like, I threw them a curveball and was like, actually, I'm also going to apply, so I'm stepping down from the board. And I think I shocked them, but here we are. And so now I obviously was successful candidate. And we are an all-women team. Coincidentally, it wasn't just, we have 7 department heads, all women. I forgot, I wanted to mention part of that. I just want to throw in this fact that in 2021, the Ontario Nonprofit did a study that said 75% of executives in the nonprofit sector are women, so that's great. But of that, only 14% are BIPOC, and that includes men and women, so it's obviously less for women or other genders. Anyway, and none of this, and this, I asked Tom if he was going to be in the session today, and he said yes, and I said I really wanted him here because I really want to publicly thank him, because we know right now we're at like the greatest transfer of wealth, really, between generations, but that wealth isn't just assets, it's also like knowledge and power. And if it wasn't for someone like Tom to not just open a door, but like he actually put his name, I'm getting emotional, behind mine, like we wouldn't be here today. And I've been able to like open that door for other people in our organization. So Tom really deserves a round of applause. Like, I've never met a more amazing champion. So thanks, Tom. Okay, anyway. Next. Okay, so setting intentions for Circle. We want to protect and preserve the housing stock, bring it into a state of good repair, reduce harmful environmental impacts, and improve the tenant experience, of course, and look for ways to improve the existing systems. Those were all our like basic goals and intentions. But then, thanks, Brendan. But then we realized like we really had this like underlying intrinsic intention, and that was we want to address the financialization of housing, improve social mobility and generational wealth opportunities for families. We want to destigmatize affordable housing, that's a big one. And we want to dismantle forms of oppression embedded in our systems. So how do we do that? We basically asked ourselves, like, what is the future of affordable housing, and how does it affect our organization? So this was like pre-work that we did for Circle specifically, but I think it'll be relevant for any land trust here or people exploring land trusts. And the research, you know, I personally did was like we dug into, it says 5, but there's actually 6 major considerations. So like I have a lot of information on all of these, so if you want it, I'm happy to share it. But the one we're really going to talk about today is like risk reduction and long-term stability. Okay, and how that affects active stewardship. So for us, the main challenges were the size and shape of our portfolio. Like as you saw, it's like totally spread out. There's like you have to drive, you physically have to go place to place. That's a huge challenge for us. Oops, it's okay. And then the different topologies, every house is unique, you can't standardize. What we saw when we inherited the portfolio, like TCH, you know, because they have buildings, they're used to standardizing everything. They tried to standardize in our houses, and we saw a lot of like wrong size equipment for the house because it just doesn't work. Every house needs its own special circumstances and machinery equipment. And the main issue or challenge we faced was that we had like 2 different requirements. We had tenants who'd been waiting for years to have repairs done, and they needed it done as soon as possible. And then we also recognized that we were really like facing a once-in-a-generational opportunity to actually do more with these houses and think long-term, like thinking we own them forever. We basically can't sell them or a land trust. How can we invest in them today and do the kind of repair work that'll be long-lasting. And so we came up with a plan on how to do that. That's the question there. Okay, and that is through active partnership.
It's working. Hi, everyone. Brandon, I'm with People Design Coop, and sometimes I forget that we're also not with Circle, because the lines at times feel very blurred. But thanks, Alia, and I really appreciate it. I actually really like that, Alia, and I haven't often heard your full story about coming into it and the work with Tom. And so it's really nice to hear about that, because every day when we work with them, whenever we show up to the office, there's this incredible vibe that happens at the Circle office, and I think it's really in part, well, just entirely thanks to the leadership team and all the amazing folks that work there. And it's totally unlike any other group that we've worked with on private housing, on public housing, on anything. The level of care that goes into the decisions that they're making and all of these homes is just unmatched. And there's a lot of great land trusts around here too that I think really emulate that type of work too, and around this whole conference. So it feels very much in line with, I think, the what this conference is about, and also more broadly the cooperative movement and the co-ops that we work closely with too. We are a nonprofit architecture practice. I think, sadly, we're maybe the only one in the country. I keep asking that kind of as a question, hoping someone will put their hand up. There are a handful of other cooperative practices, which is really nice to see, and a lot of conversation around that. But we focus specifically on working with public housing, social housing, community land trusts. We do some kind of a little more experimental work with private folks who are looking to push the bounds around sustainability, but that's a sort of small part of our work and perhaps shrinking. We want to talk a little bit about, and I think we were invited here actually to talk about this capital report, which is the culmination of a lot of the work that we've been doing together over the past couple of years. And I think Alia has a little bit to add to this. But we're really excited. Like, this is an enormous portfolio. Alia mentioned that there's a huge amount of different typologies. And there's a lot of potential in this to think about how we manage homes in perpetuity over a long term. And that's very different from how a lot of us think about managing housing stock. It's in particular different from how a lot of capital owners, a lot of large REITs and property owners think about managing their assets, which is much more extractive. And so the potential for that within a portfolio like this, and the potential for the things that we are really excited about doing, the like really nerdy things, like electrifying homes, like thinking about using different, healthier materials, becomes extremely important because we're measuring on a different time horizon. If you ask a private homeowner, what does it look like to make a decision about changing your roof? Or like, you're gonna get them to think 5, 10 years, even if they're gonna stay in that home forever and they've promised you. It's really difficult to make a decision beyond that. Perpetuity, we can easily have conversations about 100 years. And what does it make sense? What decision makes most sense over a 100-year time span? Not to say that there aren't other constraints here, but it really changes the math around the decisions that we get to make. And there's much less tension between decisions that are good for tenants and good for our planet, and decisions that are good for your pocketbook over 100 years. So.
Thanks. And so I'll add what we did, our approach specifically was when we took our portfolio, we had about 50 houses that were vacant because they needed significant repair. And so those, we were like, we can do a bit more here, and we'll aim for longer than the typical 10-year reno work. And we'll use those as a learning opportunity to to plan out for the rest of the portfolio. And anything that it just needed a bit of maybe interior finishing, or it was tenanted, those went quickly more with the typical reno process so that they could be done as fast as possible. So then we created these two streams to help us sort of meet those different timelines, I suppose, to getting the work done. Oh, and this is just a slide. I just wanted to show you an example of, like, because we're talking about risk and long-term planning, what the utility costs. So Circle does not pay 100% of the utilities for our properties. Like everything else in our portfolio, it's not consistent. And so we're working towards getting it there, but this is the data for what we're paying right now. So those are the houses that we do pay utilities for, and this year it was 1.7 million just in utility costs, and that was a 2.5% increase from last year. And all the research we've done is showing, and you'll notice gas and water, of course, the most excessive, and all the research we're looking at now is projecting that it's going to be 3% increase for gas alone year over year until, like, we decide to, like, totally decarbonize.
And so, I mean, a lot of this work that we're talking about today has emerged through now a couple of years of working together. But I mentioned a little bit as we started to look at the financial impact of making these decisions and making a case for investment in different areas, we started thinking about what sort of the ideal North Star was for the type of home that we were looking to build. And it wasn't necessarily flashy, but it was really thinking about a lot of Circle's values, about a lot of our values as a co-op, and thinking about, like, how we put tenants at the center. And so a lot of that starts with tenant health. And as we start to build out from tenant health, you don't have to go too far to get to environmental health. And a lot of these communities and a lot of these locations, these scattered homes, are some of the best potential housing stock in our city. They're mixed into, like, wonderful neighborhoods with access to good schools and park space and everything that you can imagine, all the things that we dream of in a good home with big yards, and really, really strong community. No matter where we go, neighbors, folks within the Circle community and outside care deeply about these homes. As we go through and do these renovations, we get to see what it looks like to hold housing stock. Many of these homes are well over 100 years old, but many of them have been cared for in really interesting and cared for really deeply by the residents. And you can tell that the murals painted on the walls are not, you know, maintenance folks going in and doing that. It's residents who were patching and fixing themselves and caring for these homes, even though it wasn't their asset per se. It was very much their home. And so that brought us to thinking about what it would look like to talk and develop a 100-year home, and specifically in our context in Toronto. And a lot of this is based around making material choices for homes that and materials that don't have to be replaced every 10 years. When we look at what sort of a typical horizon is for material choices that we make in a home, 10, 15, maybe 20 years is what we start to see, and then they start to fail, particularly when you look at the cheapest or most cost-efficient choices that we can make. And of course, those choices typically, you know, landfill aside, they also typically tend to be the most harmful. They're made from petrochemicals. They're really toxic for inhabitants. And so we start thinking about, how can we build something that really doesn't have to be touched for 100 years? And can it be built out of more natural bio-based materials? There's so much potential and so much research that we, you know, as an architectural practice, benefit from, and don't necessarily always have opportunity to think about, and particularly not at this scale. The other thing that's really exciting as we think about this is the, you know, we think about carbon, and I won't get too into the weeds, or maybe we can in conversation, but we think about, obviously, embodied carbon, which is all the carbon in the materials, and then operational carbon, which is how the home is operating. And one of the first things that we decided was going to be part of this next strategy with Circle was converting to all electric systems and getting all of these homes off of gas. And all of the renovations that we've done together so far have converted these homes to fully electric operations, which is exciting because it's the single best thing that we can do for reducing our carbon impact. There's all these different versions, but, you know, I'm going to point to Joel, and I don't know if he remembers this stat, but there's a great one. Like, one of the homes that we were looking at, converting it to all electric was the equivalent of taking like 20 or something cars off the road every year. So it's just major impact, and we don't always think about that with our homes. The furnace is parked in the basement, and we don't think about it running on gas. But really, it's the toxic methane that's keeping our homes warm. Now, with that said, turning 600 homes to 100-year homes overnight like that is just simply not possible. It's not financially possible, and it's not practically possible, and particularly as we're figuring out and learning as we go, what does it look like to build a 100-year home, and build it in this context with homes that have already been here for around 100 years, that we're trying to renew. We have to take a portfolio approach. And so there are some places where we just have to fix it because there's a family living there and we have to make sort of the quickest decision that we can. And so we start to think about homes where we are perhaps needing to make concessions because we're prioritizing speed, safety, that type of thing, maybe falling in a 10-year bucket. There's homes where we can make slightly more significant investments that are thinking about perhaps a 50-year bucket or beyond. And then, of course, the homes, which is right now our standard of a 100-year bucket. How do we start to think about adding density to those sites too? And there's a lot of new introductions of bylaws that are allowing that. And we can think about material circularity. There's really nothing that's not on the table for starting to develop a portfolio that gets to 100-year homes. So all this to say, it's a big, ambitious goal. We're starting to build out little samples. And the intention is the more that we collect data on this as well too, the faster we're hoping to accelerate towards 100-year homes. Maybe the one last thing that I'll say that is pretty exciting about electrification was going into this, maybe it was a year and a half ago, we really started to look at the data. Our opening position was electricity or nothing. And then we had really constructive conversations about, like, again, cost and what does that mean? And what does it mean for cost for tenants, where Circle pays for some of these and also tenants pay for this. When we're looking at tenant affordability, can we convert to all electric, particularly if we're not doing envelope improvements to the home? And through some of these early samples, what we found is actually when we do switch entirely to electric with minimal improvements to the envelope, we're reducing the operating costs of these homes for tenants. So not only is it better for us and the environment, but it's actually cheaper to operate these homes with electricity now. Now, of course, this is not without its challenges, and Alia talked a little bit about what this looks like across the portfolio, but very specifically in our work, there's a lot of risk and reluctancy. I see Chantel smiling in the industry, and there's a lot of like misinformation and just confusing information or contradictory information. And we look at a lot of different sort of emerging data sources to help make informed decisions, and then we look really closely at the data that's coming out of the portfolio as we're making decisions. But so much of these decisions are made by asking the trade that you're working with. And we hear time and time again, I've been doing it this way for 20 years, never had a problem, why would you change it? That's how you get to problems. And it's not wrong. We see failures happen, you know, in more than 20 years often, or we see them being buried within walls. And so we don't always believe when someone says, I've been doing it for 20 years and I haven't had a problem. You may just not have gotten a call back about the problem. But all that to say, the reluctancy is really an opportunity for education. And so there was a couple, well actually these are photos from education or training day that we did with a bunch of builders, builders who were bidding against themselves and were very unsure about showing up to one facility for one day together. But we brought them together to talk about high-performance assemblies and the different types of materials that we wanted, and to work in a much more collaborative way and to share information between sites. And everyone had a blast, learned a lot, connected to suppliers that could get them better materials. And so that risk and reluctancy, we've really worked hard to flip that into opportunities for education as well. Access to good data is really tied to that, and who and where your data is coming from. And then the availability and cost of better materials is a huge factor. And sometimes if we want to use something, even if it's affordable, you just can't buy it. And a lot of the builders that we're working with are accustomed to going to the shelves of Home Depot to buy what they need. And if they can't get it there, they don't install it, or they throw their hands up. Or if we can get it, it's just astronomically expensive. And it shouldn't be, but it's just not available in Canada. And then the last one really is around experience in social procurement. And part of running these workshops is because we just can't find enough builders, surprisingly, that have experience with this typology of housing and are willing to. And then there's sort of the usual suspects, but inviting in more builders and thinking about how we put a social procurement lens on this as well too means that there's both opportunity, but a lot more work that we have to do to build this roster of partners that Circle needs to manage a portfolio of 600 homes. This is, decades of work for a handful of builders, and at that, we just can't possibly find enough partners. And I wanted to really quickly, I won't go into too much detail, but just talk a little bit about how we're thinking kind of collectively and with a partner like Circle about the opportunities that come from homes in perpetuity and the opportunities that come from working with different types of partners, nonprofit architecture, nonprofit builders, folks who exist more in a social economy or a social solidarity economy. And for those who maybe were out listening to the New Economy Project, there's a few others kicking around here, which is really exciting to see. But a lot of people that are thinking about building a social solidarity economy, which for us is a less extractive approach to building. And so if you believe that there is enough resources within our housing system to provide good, dignified housing for everyone, then we have to interrogate a little bit more closely what's happening through the system. That means that we're not at the other end of it seeing good housing making it to everyone. And the way that we've so far been able to approach this, working with Alia and her team, is thinking really deeply about procurement. Who do we get to work with? What do they look like? What is their experience, or what does it need to be? But also what materials, as I said, are and are not available, and where are they coming from? And when we're talking about buying windows for 600 homes, we don't need 600 all at once, but over a number of years. When we're talking about buying insulation for that number of homes, there's a serious, like a very significant market that you're starting to control here, and where you orient that towards can have a really significant impact, but also means that instead of going to the shelves at Home Depot, we can go directly to the supplier that we might want to work with that doesn't currently retail its products in Canada or locally, and say, hey, can you onshore enough products for us, or can we develop it even better locally at the same or lower cost? And so instead of using things like vinyl windows, we can buy locally made fiberglass or better windows that are much higher performing, and we're not asking Circle to spend $1 more on them. Actually, in some of the early pilots, we've been able to save like upwards of 25% on products like that. So it really, when we move away from an extractive approach, it really starts to reframe what's possible when at every stage of the way people aren't filling their pockets and extracting. It also means greater supply chain control, which if you were working on this through the last couple of years, and particularly through the pandemic, you realized like it didn't matter if you had enough money to pay for something, they just weren't, the product wasn't available. And the better relationships that we forge with a lot of these suppliers, the more control and stability we have in the supply chain as well. And so why does this matter? I think Alia has a piece to say, and I mean, it probably sounds very similar, but it's really exciting for us to work with a partner who is so relentless in thinking about doing this differently, and in thinking about what it means to hold property in perpetuity. And we see, especially now in this crisis, the way that a lot of property managers, a lot of REITs and some public housing providers are managing their portfolios, which is resulting in dead assets after a number of years. And in a lot of cases, that's what happened with these homes. It becomes really expensive to manage them and to retrofit them. And so we know that we have to approach this differently, and we know that we have to think about more than just speed and cost because the math, the economics behind running homes like this in perpetuity are very, very different.
And I guess I would just add, one of the founding intentions we set for stewardship was obviously to protect and preserve, but our new approach now is really about active stewardship, and that means that it's not enough to just protect and preserve. We really have to constantly think about how we can improve, and that's sort of been our approach around stewardship.
There's our info if you want to talk to us more, or right now. We also had a last-minute video. We've been starting to document some of this work a little bit on film, and did a last-minute rush to try to put it into a very short clip, which I think we can play. Anyway, so I got it like 12 last night or something last minute. But I hope you like it. All good? Yeah? Do I click? Wait, you got it. Yeah.
We let them know that this is not for. And some moms have said, when we said, so are you guys going to sell the house? Can we buy it? If we can buy it, and we let them know that this is not for sale. So you get nobody, no. This is not for sale. You are safe.
It's a challenging time to be thinking about this. We are in a housing crisis, and there are families that need homes. We constantly hear more housing, faster. And there's this real tension between building quickly and building well.
And so asking someone to be a little bit more patient, to take a little bit more time and do things a little bit differently it's a really big risk, and it's a hard thing to do.
So there were things that we needed to do right away, like you and Sean did the inspections, and there were life safety stuff that this needs to be done tomorrow. So we itemized all that stuff in the tenanted houses. And with balancing getting everything repaired right away, we had this bigger goal of being more environmentally friendly, energy retrofits along the portfolio. The typical timeline for repair work in the industry is about 10 years. So you'll repair for 10 years and then think you're gonna have to do it again. And that's the cost associated with it. But we found these partners, People Design Coop. I looked up groups that were active in energy retrofits specifically in single family homes in the neighborhoods that we had houses, and they came up. And then it was an added bonus that they were a nonprofit and a co-op. So it just seemed really values aligned.
Hey, nice to see you.
So when we opened this up, we were intending to just reinforce it and replace insulation and finishes, but all of the structure was completely rotten. All the wood was completely rotten because there was no separation between grade and framing, whereas now there's a proper 6-inch lip and proper waterproofing, so now it will last a long time.
It's amazing when you open up these walls how much deterioration sometimes you find that's hidden in there.
Circle Community LandTrust was a really unique land trust in that it's not place-based. We have a portfolio of over 600 scattered homes, and we were formed to protect and invest in these homes and steward them in perpetuity.
Right now we're in this really special time because there's houses that came to us vacant that the team has worked really hard to fix up, and we're moving families in every month. We're moving more and more families in, and they're usually coming from the waiting list, or they're coming from a unit that's way too small for their family. I think that having a home like that you can make your own, that you can have the backyard, that you can have a garage and a driveway and all this stuff, have your own space, I think is really important for a lot of people.
I think our early conversations really have built on this idea of what does it mean to build a home? What does it mean to build a home that's going to last, and how do we make good decisions quickly?
This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
How much time do we have? 11? Great. Cool for questions? Yeah?
Any questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
20 years ago, and there was this problem, and I'm not a builder, but it seems to me that building codes and building standards and passive house, these are 25-year horizons. Buildings change so much. So why would I see the logic in 25 years, maybe even 50 years, but 100 isn't. It's not intuitive for me. Won't we be the Jetsons then?
I mean, I think it's a really good question, and maybe I'll first start by saying, this is very much, these are buckets that we're working towards. The idea is let's build things that can last as long as possible, and then start to think about what happens at the end of life for those as well too. So yes, if we do determine that our housing stock is changing too quickly, and there's places in the world that we can go look at homes that are built to be able to be disassembled and rebuilt really quickly, then perhaps it makes sense and to have homes that are maybe not intended to last that long. But when you go work with a lot of engineering communities and think about a lot of timber as well too, they're not just thinking about 100-year horizons, but they're thinking about the product life cycle after that 100. So it's even beyond a CLT panel is used in a building for 100 years, and then when it starts to fail, it is removed and it's used for a walkway, it's used for something like that. The best thing that we know is just build to last as long as we can, and along with that, there's also a bunch rolled up into what does it mean to last for 100 years. I said earlier, a lot of these homes are well over 100 years old. We open up the space a little bit, we sort of make bathrooms a little bit bigger, but by and large, there's not a lot that we need to change in these. So I do think that we can, consider that these homes might exist easily 100 years from now, and our needs perhaps could be different. Some of the most pressing needs that we see right now are around climate, and particularly with vulnerable populations, the impacts of wildfire smoke, of incredible rains like we're experiencing today, means water issues with the home, which leads to mold, which is one of the most significant things that we found in a lot of these homes. So yeah, I would just say there's a lot rolled up into that. Are we designing them to last to 100 years and then fail on that? And we say, no, of course not. But the sort of motive behind that is, can we build things that are going to last as long as possible until we decide that they need to be disassembled and repurposed in other ways or recycled properly? Maybe I'll start, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation, great work. Yeah, we're renovating similar homes. Chantal is leading that work. We're, that tension between speed and making the right decisions and doing those longer term investments. I have maybe a political question. Given that we're looking at I'm assuming that I think some of your funding comes from CMHC for the retrofits. So we have this challenge, and I'm curious for your perspective on it. We're in this kind of unique moment where there's funding and financing from the federal government to support things like deep energy retrofit, retrofit of social housing, and our organizations are benefiting from those programs. Given that we see a potential conservative government very soon, and there's a history of new governments canceling such programs, we've been feeling the pressure to move quick because we're concerned that the subsidization of some of this work or the support for some of this work from governments may retract pretty soon. And so I'm wondering how you're balancing that with this consideration, because it's really important. Like what you're discussing is critical, but how will you pay for it if that money disappears in the next 2 years? If we go slow, then we may not be able to take advantage of the current moment where the government's willing to support our work.
Thanks, Josh. Great question. And yeah, so I guess first, we are also taking advantage of all the incentives out there for energy retrofits, and we're stacking anything that's covered by those grants in addition to our CMHC funding, although everything was technically covered by the funding itself, so it's just giving us more of an advantage. And we have flagged the potential change in government and what it could look like. The way we think it might play out is, we know with the Conservative government that most likely the investment in housing will still be there because it's such a high priority need, but it more likely will shift to private partnerships. So I think it's important for land trusts to not just rely on grants and to have be able to react and be nimble to find partners where that funding might be redirected in some other way, and you could still access it with, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, who knows, a private partner. And this whole plan isn't slowing down. I guess that maybe we should talk there's still that is the push. Anything tenanted or smaller scale is getting rent out as quickly as possible. It's really a few choice properties that are becoming those examples where we're just doing a little bit more research. Those ones would have taken more time anyway because of the extent of reno.
Yeah, and I think maybe I just add is again, this is a really long time horizon that we're looking at. So it's not just the shift to the next government, but beyond that, and how we can, with what we're learning on some of these not higher priority, but some of these homes where we're experimenting and learning a little bit more, is that we're going to work it into almost just for swaps. So we're not looking at these hopefully, we're not going to be looking at an economic model that is relying on big chunks of money to be dropped in every time that the political sphere, chooses to or is able to. But that a lot of this can be done through partnerships, through creative funding, and hopefully the need, as we start to solidify what that is, could lead to better tools. They were just talking about public banks and things of that sort, which we don't necessarily have quite yet, but there's a lot that we can learn when we look south of the border as well. So I don't know if that exactly, speed is something, it's attention. No, we're it's going as quickly as possible. We're learning, as we go. Yeah.
Hi, that was great. Thank you. Just in terms of sector transformation on the supply chain side, it occurred to me that, co-ops, consumer co-ops develop in areas of scarcity. And I know it's early days, but does it make sense for CLTs who have the same, perpetuity kind of value base to aggregate demand and work together somehow?
Thank you. I love talking about this. So part of what we're building, we sort of talk about people as the architectural practice as the one co-op. We actually are currently 2 co-ops. One is a solidarity co-op with the intention of building out sort of an entirely separate economy and inviting others in who are already existing there that's going to serve the needs of social housing providers. And one of the things that I'm talked a little bit about, purchasing windows and insulation. We've been doing a bunch of these experiments or pilots with buying with the intention of setting up what will become a purchasing co-op that is sort of communally owned, hopefully by a lot of CLTs. So I think to your question, centralizing this power, the buying power that comes with this, setting standards that meet the needs of these, because so much of what exists in the private market does not meet the needs of public housing, I think is going to unlock a lot for this type of housing and hopefully allow us to build much better homes for the same or less. Taking over the world.
I think this is great. And as you know, we collaborate. We should talk more. We have to update each other on some stuff that we've done over the summer. But I wanted to say, I find it really interesting. And one of the I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on the tension between like of course, all of the work that you're doing on the homes in the fast track to just get them up to snuff is kind of probably closer to the 20-year horizon than the 10-year, although sometimes different decisions get made. And I wanted to just hear from you about how you're squaring off the effort to put in like really good materials into existing homes versus the 100-year scheme, which is basically knocking down the house and doing something that's a lot better and denser and has more units and better construction and better detailing. And how, if you're investing right now on a 20-year or plus horizon to just keep the existing house as good as possible, how you're squaring with that potential long-term or other goal of maybe one day knocking it down, and what those environmental choices are.
And maybe I'll first say, like, I don't know sort of what the geographical range of the room is, but Joshua and Chantal are Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, which also received a big chunk of the homes through the transfer, and we're kind of always trading information. Oh, 1 minute. How do I fit an answer into 1 minute? When we get to, like, every home Ali was talking about is different, unique, and making decisions that apply across the entire portfolio is impossible. So we're just trying to create frameworks that allow us to make decisions really quickly, that are the best decision for the property. When we get to making a decision about a property, it kind of looks like a maze of like string tied across decisions and like a mission room of, anyways, it's incredibly difficult. There's things about that, we've done preliminary scans of, can this property receive density now or into the future, and have started to earmark those and just push them down the schedule a little bit and prioritize the ones that we know can't for a bunch of reasons. And then look at this, like the existing conditions of the home. And, to your point is, along the lines of building better homes that will last longer, we're also dealing with this tension of the best thing we do is keep what's already there, because when we're moving all of that into the landfill and then putting new, it still is creating carbon and sort of a net harm, unfortunately. So that is very much part of the tension. We're trying to preserve everything that we can. Some of these homes have to come down. They're structurally not safe, and so that makes the decision really easy, and we're kind of starting with the easy decisions and learning everything we can through those. And then I think, where it gets more nuanced, it's difficult, and that's where, sometimes the decision is made easy by availability of funds at this point in time. But yeah, there is no secret sauce or answer. Yeah. Yeah.
I would just add to the group while you're having lunch, because these guys are making me think of this. Like the building we're in, this is the old jail. This was a jail in downtown East Side for a lot of years. A lot of mean and shit in the building, and the wooden design out there is an indigenous architect, and there's all kinds.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming, and to Ali and Brandon for sharing your wisdom. Really amazing session. Again, just a reminder to let the folks who are going to the AGM, who are members, signed up members of CNCLT, to grab their lunch first. If you can otherwise just stand aside, wait a few minutes so that we don't have the massive rush. And again, if you have dietary restrictions, please find one of the team, either at the registration desk or behind the catering table, and they'll help you out. All right, thank you so much.